Hello, my grots and gits. Welcome back to another episode of Happy Crumping War Gaming. Today, we're going to talk about the almighty foes, the emperor's chosen, the few, the proud, the 10,000 strong. People in the meta currently are freaking out about this army because they're saying, oh, they're suddenly overpowered again. Well, fret not, my friends. I am here with a definitive guide of how you will be handling the Adeptus Custodes with the strategies and the tactics that you need to make sure that you can take care of them. Okay, so let's jump right on into the video. First thing that you have to do when you're playing against Custodes is you have to identify what the big problems are. So what I've done is I've identified the big freaking problems for you. Number one, they have relatively high toughness with extremely high armor and a universal fort field of pain. And this is the thing that you know about Custodes, because if you're shooting high quality weaponry into them, they're liable just to spike their saves and then you are screwed. Okay, bottom line right there. Then they have access to incredible defensive stratagems. And this is just the pure truth. So they can have a -1 damage strat, and that is a battle tactic. So what they can do is they can stack that on top of a shield captain or an Alaris captain in order to give 2 different units -1 damage. And with 3 wounds each on the profiles, this can actually be a very, very big deal for the Custodes. Or 4 wounds if it's Terminators, right? Then they have a Fights First stratagem. Now, this Fights First stratagem does have a caveat. It does require them to be put on top of an objective. So if they're not on an objective, they cannot use that stratagem. So that's one of the things that we're going to talk about how to play around. And then they also have very strong melee profiles, which we'll talk about. So that isn't a problem number 2. Problem number 1, very tough with high armor and 4-ups. Problem number 2, great defensive stratagems and strong melee profiles. Then finally, we have the problem number 3. Problem number 3 is a huge darn issue. They have great movement shenanigans. They have teleports, they have rapid ingresses, they have resurrections. These are problems that the meta is going to have to learn how to handle. And by the way, basically every army in the game can handle Custodes. You just have to learn how, and that's what I am here to do. I'm going to help you guys figure that one out. I will say perhaps Admech would seriously struggle against Custodes, but outside of that, I think everyone can do it. There are certainly easier and harder matchups, of course. So let's move on into the actual weaknesses of the Custodes. Now that we've identified the problem strengths, let's look about the weaknesses. And these are things that we are going to want to exploit. So our weaknesses, we have a very, very low model count army. And I know when I say weaknesses, the Custodian in the picture, it looks very confused. He's like, weaknesses? We don't have those. I'm like, well, actually, you do, nerd. So basically, they're a low model and unit count army. When I'm playing my Custodes, I typically have anywhere between 8 and 10 units. That's it. My largest size unit is a 6-man squad. And then I have, that's including my 2 assassins, by the way, which are 1-man units. They have an exceptionally bad secondary game, right? So if you're playing with Custodes, you really have 2 options. Your first option is you're playing tactical, and that is what I advocate for. And then your second option is you are taking a lot of inefficient, really units that don't lean to your strengths to try to play fixed. And that is a bad choice. Now, recently, Manny Chima, who won the World Warhammer Championships, has created a Custodes list that is capable of doing secondaries, because what he's doing is he's putting the guys with swords and pistols into the units, and that does open up some fixed play. However, I do think it is a very inefficient way of running Custodes because you lose out on a ton of your offensive potential once you do that. Meaning, I think that's very successful because Manny's a fantastic player, but I wouldn't recommend that style list to people. So essentially, you're looking at an inefficient fixed list, or you're looking at a tactical list, or you're looking at being Manny Chima. Fair enough. Then you have no native lone ops, and you have a high reliance on allies. So this is a big problem with teams, for example. So Custodes desperately want allies. They would kill to be able to have the Calidus and the Eversor and these types of units. It is a very big deal for them because that's how they're going to score essentially all of their secondaries. Now, the number 4 weakness that this army has is they have an extreme vulnerability to movement manipulation. The second you put -2 to their move, -2 to their advance, -2 to their charge, you have done a horrible, rude, mean thing to the Custodes. So these are big weaknesses that Custodes have. Now, let's look at the Custodes army rule as we learn how to circumvent how amazing it is. So the army rule in the fight phase, because the Custodes are a fighting army. They are at the beginning of the fight phase, that is your turn and their turn, they will get to choose for the entire army to be -1 to be hit, sustained hits, or lethal hits. In addition to this, because of the detachment that they currently have in the index, they have a 4-up Feel No Pain against mortals and Devastating Wounds. So this and Devastating Wounds thing is the reason why Custodes are a bit of a problem now. And the thing is it needed to happen because they were unplayable before the balanced status light. And so this thing's causing a lot of problems because suddenly your flat 3 dev wounds are getting broken up into 1 and 2 damage because they're getting Feel No Pains against it. Problem number 1, how are we going to address this? Problem number 1 was high toughness and armor save and invulns. So how do we affect this? Well, there's going to be 3 profiles in the Custodes army that you need to remember. The first is going to be toughness 6, 3 wounds, 2-up, 4-up, 4-up invuln, and that is going to be your basic Custodian guard. Now, you can get them to T4 if they take a shield, but at that point in time, they also lose their assault weapons and they lose a ton of damage because they drop down to damage 1 instead of damage 2. So most times you won't see that. So typically that is going to be the defensive profile. Now, if it is a warden and you're fighting the warden and the strength is higher than the warden, they'll also be -1 to wound, which makes them very, very tough. Now, that only applies if the wardens have a character attached to them, but of course they're going to have a freaking character attached to them. And then the last profile that you really need to remember is going to be the Terminator's profile. They will be at that sweet, sweet T7 with 4 wounds and a 2-up, 4-up. So that is actually a pretty big difference going to that T7. Now, how do we answer this problem? Well, you answer it with flat 3 damage. Essentially, Custodes hate flat 3 damage. It's one of the reasons why in my personal Custodes list, I've been running double Alaris Terminator bricks because it really helps for that the armies that tech for flat 3. So this is going to be things like the Forge Fiend, Manticores and Guard, Sword Brethren, your Death Coptas. I know, I said it. If you're an Orc player, remember, I still like Death Coptas. Death Coptas are incredible. You just have to accept that you're going to be given up Bring It Down if you take them. All right, so these are ways that you actually just get those flat 3 damage. And trust me, you have not lived until you've seen the salt that comes out of a Custodian player's eyes the second your Death Coptas shoot and kill 2 wardens because those rockets are twin linked. It is glorious and lovely. And remember, Custodes have no access to Armor of Contempt. So the second you get to that sweet, sweet AP3, they're on their invuln, regardless of whether they have cover or not. If they don't have cover, and you have AP2, they're on their invuln. So they have no access to Armor of Contempt. So your AP2 will hurt them. So going to that AP2, going to that AP1, ignoring cover, going to that AP3, doesn't matter. These things will get through Custodes and it will cause a lot of problems. Now, you can either go with that flat 3 damage, or another great option is just simply going to be flooding them with tons of AP1, ignore cover. Votan, I hate you freaking space dwarves. Or tons of that AP2/AP3 stuff. So that is a fantastic way to do it. The next way that you really want to address the Custodes is that sweet, sweet lethal hits rule, because they do have that relatively high toughness because they're all infantry, and that 6-up toughness for infantry really messes with a lot of the anti-infantry guns. So the lethal hits become very, very powerful here. Basically, what I'm saying is that when you're playing against Custodes, you want volume. You don't want small amounts of quality attacks. You just don't. Now, there is an exception to that, right? And that would be against armies like Chaos Knights or your Imperial Knights that are going to be shooting 12 plus Melta shots a turn that are just every single failed one is a dead Custode. Because if you kill 4 Custodians in a turn, that was not a good turn for the Custodes player. I know how crazy that sounds, but remember, 4 dead Custodes is at least 200 points of their army. So that is a really, really big deal, okay? So volume is going to be key against Custodes. What are some of the best style units to address problem 1? Well, the best type of units that you're going to address here is going to be like your aggressors. Aggressors in Gladius, aggressors in Vanguard, aggressors basically anywhere that you can get them to their sweet, sweet AP2 or AP1 ignoring cover. They will smash Custodes. Custodes hate aggressors. That shooting profile is a disaster for the Custodes because you're always going to have the Apothecary Biologus for the lethals, and then you're going to spend the CP for, or you're going to spend the points for Fire Discipline to get sustained. It just crushes Custodes. They hate that. Fight on death bricks. So take your orcs, for example. My knobs. Knobs smash the Adeptus Custodes because when the knobs charge in, Custodes fight on first, then the knobs will just fight on death. Doing fight on death will get around the Custodes' ability to spend their stratagem to be -1 damage, meaning that the knobs will just completely obliterate the Custodes. If you're curious about how that works, I can do another video on that, but I definitely explained it really in depth on my how to get around fights first units. And maybe I can post it somewhere like here-ish, but it'll be at the end of the video credits. You can check that video out on how to defeat fights first units. It's a really big, important thing that you must understand if you're going to be playing against Custodes. Mana cores. Mana cores slap Custodes. Custodes hate mana cores. They will just absolutely obliterate the army. As a matter of fact, a good guard player is all but certain to beat Custodes. Forge Fiends, slap through Custodes. Obliterators, slap through Custodes. Riptides, slap through Custodes. Crisis Suits, slap through Custodes. And what am I showing you here, guys? What I'm showing you is high volume with moderate AP ignoring cover, or relatively high volume with that flat 3 damage. And these are the units that are going to be crushing Custodes. So if you're harding with Custodes, these are the style of units that you need to be thinking about bringing along. All right, cool. Problem number 2, we're going to have defensive strats and abilities and very, very strong melee. So we have to learn how to deal with this, okay? So they have a -1 damage strat. They have a 1 CP, which is 2 CP, but it's a battle tactic, so their captains will allow them to do it again. Then they will have a sticky objective, which does help them with board control because they don't have many units. And they also have the sweet 2 CP fight first on an objective. This is a huge deal. And like I just said, you must know how to handle fights first units. You either do that by piling in, you either do that by fighting on death. There's a couple different ways, and I'm just going to pitch my video that I already did on how to defeat fights first one more time for you guys to go watch that. Then you have a character called Valerian, and he will give his unit permanent AOC in melee. When you have Valerian leading a unit of Wardens, suddenly this unit becomes toughness 6, -1 to wound, 2 up armor save in melee with armor of contempt, 4 up invuln, and a once per game 4 up feel no pain. And you can even make them -1 to hit in the melee phase as well, simply due to the normal Custodes army, and it doesn't die. So if you ever see Valerian on the board, you kill them in shooting or you don't bother. Just trust me on that one, okay? All right, now the profile of essentially everything in the Custodes army is more or less, it's going to be 5 attacks, hitting on 2s, strength 7, AP 2, damage 2. They do have very easy access to reroll wound rolls. So a lot of times when you go, it'll skew the math, right? So if you're going in and you're an orc player and you're expecting, oh, I'm just going to be -1 to wound, the Custode player is just going to say, aha, I'm just going to reroll wound rolls against you, because the Terminators pretty much do it natively. They get that against all monsters, vehicles, and characters. And then the Custode Guard get it as long as they control an objective, which with a high OC value, they typically will. So your -1 to wound type style strats, or being you can't be wounded on better than 4s or whatever, it's not quite as effective in Custodes as it is into other armies. So you have to keep that in the back of your head, knowing that you're not going to survive against this army like you might against other armies. Now, the good thing is Custodes basically do not have any access to higher than AP2. The only access they have, I think, is the Blade Champion, because the Blade Champion himself will have 1 attack profile that gets to AP3, and Valerian himself will get access to AP3. But outside of that, the army doesn't have it. So if you're an army that has armor contempt, say your Marines or your Chaos Space Marines, you know that you can take any unit in the Custodes army down to essentially AP1. And that is a very, very big deal for you to be aware of, because you can seriously blunt the Custodes' offensive output simply by doing that. So how do we deal with this strong melee profile, and how do we deal with these defensive strats, etc.? Well, combat mastery, I've already beaten that dead horse. Watch that video on how to beat fights first units. Fight on death. High OC or high mobility to stop the primary game. When you are playing Tyranids, all you want to do really is you run up those Norns, you put them on the objectives, and then whenever the Custodes player steals objectives, you just steal them back with your gargoyles, and you don't charge him. It's actually one of the most hilarious things in the entire game is when you have the mirror match between Custodes. Because essentially what happens is the one Custode player will advance 1 inch away from the opponent and then say, okay, your turn, you charge me. Because whoever gets charged is going to have the fights first strat. It's very funny how it works. So generally speaking, when you're playing against Custodes, and this is something I really harp on, people, they're not quite grasping it, so I'm going to say it very publicly here. Don't engage Custodes unless you have to. If you can score 40 secondaries, because remember, they cannot stop you from scoring secondaries. They can't do it. You're going to score the secondaries you want, unless it's like tempting targets. They can kind of stop that, right? But outside of that, they will not stop it. They can't screen their backfield for more than 1 turn. So you're going to get your behind main lines. You're going to get your deploy teleport hummers. Do not engage unless you have to. If you can guarantee that you're going to get, say, 36 to 38 secondary points, and you know that you can hold on to 1 primary all game, just do that. You're basically going to win. the Custodes are going to be forced to try to take you off the one objective that you're holding very safely, which can be an extremely dangerous proposition for the Custode player. You create a huge conundrum. Do not engage with these golden boys. Just don't do it because they slap when you engage with them. That is the number one piece of advice I think I can give when you're playing against Custodes. Now, what is the problem number 3? This is movement. Now, check this out. You have to respect their you have to respect their movement, okay? When a Custodes player in the command phase resurrects one Custodian, and the way that strat works is once per game per unit. So every unit can use this strat once. They get to resurrect one dead Custodian from their unit. Well, a Custodian's base is a 40 millimeter. So if you move that and you resurrect them exactly 2 inches away from your unit, or exactly 1.999999, you essentially get 4 inches of free movement just from that resurrection. So you have to understand that a Custodes threat range is generally a lot higher than you might think it is. If you have your unit and you're like, okay, cool, I have it measured for a 10-inch charge, but they have lost a model, just know that in their turn, they are going to resurrect it, gain about 4 inches of free movement. So it's not going to be a 10-inch charge, it's actually going to be a 6-inch charge. And that can really ruin your day if you're not aware of it. So be aware of how much movement they gain from resurrecting one of their models. The next super important thing for you to understand is that Terminators, once per game, they get to teleport at the end of the opponent's turn. This can be done turn 1. They don't even go back into reserve. They just get picked up from the table, and at the end of the Custode player's movement phase, they just arrive from as if they arrived from reinforcements. So turn 1, they can do that if they go second. They can't do it if they go first, obviously. So this means that you have to be aware of those 9-inch teleports in turn 1. That is a huge threat that you have to deal with. Now, the Terminators do only move 5 inches, so once they teleport where they are, they're basically stuck there, more or less. So you have to screen your field to be aware of just how much movement they're going to get from those teleports. Now, the last, I guess there's 2 more for us to talk about as far as movement shenanigans go. So Venatari, one of my favorite units in the entire game, actually. They're the bird boys. These dudes, they get free rapid ingress. And it's not once per turn per unit. No. They have the ability to use the rapid ingress stratagem even if it's already been used on another unit, and it's not locked to per unit, meaning there is a potential quadruple rapid ingress that the Custodes can pull off on you. And let me tell you, my friend, very few people are prepared for a quadruple rapid ingress in a single turn. It is brutal and devastating. So if you see that your opponent is bringing the Venatari, you must be aware of their potential to have multiple rapid ingresses in the same turn. It's very, very vital for you to be aware of this. And then lastly, they do have access to a Blade Champion. And a Blade Champion is a character that gives reroll advances and reroll charges to the unit he leads. And then once per game in the charge phase, he can declare that they will advance and charge. And the fact that it happens in the charge phase is very, very vital, because now they get to wait and see if they had a good advance, if they want to use the advance and charge. It's not like at the beginning of the advance at the beginning of the movement phase, they say, I'm going to advance and charge this turn. So if they roll a 1 to advance, they're screwed. No. They get to wait until the charge phase to make it happen. So this can give them another unit that has exceptional mobility. This is a once per game thing, though, so they can't spam it. And this is one of the reasons why Custodes are so vulnerable to movement manipulation, because the second you hit them with a -2 to move, -2 to advance, -2 to charge, that gets them a net -6 to that advance and charge movement, which can really seriously screw them. So it's absolutely brutal. If you do the movement slowing abilities, say on the Terminators, even when they do the teleport, they're still going to be -2 to the charge. So it's going to be an 11-inch deep strike charge, or essentially an 11-inch deep strike charge, which sucks. Then you will never want to risk that. So the bottom line is when you're dealing with Custodes, you 100% have to respect the threat ranges. Have to. If you don't, they're going to crump you. So here's the weaknesses. This is what you need to exploit when you're playing against Custodes. Number 1. You always focus one unit to death. Do not let them resurrect and get extra OC, because they're going to resurrect a Warden, which is going to be 3 bonus OCs. So they're going to steal objectives. They're going to use that resurrection to steal the objective. They're going to use that resurrection to steal extra movement. It is a big freaking problem. When you want to kill Custodes, you kill one unit at a time. Take advantage of these guys not being able to deny your secondaries. So if you're an Orc player, honestly, Cleanse Deploy is a great option. Behind enemy lines, Deploy is a fantastic option if you're bringing in, say, like your Storm Boys and things. you can basically just freely do all those fixed secondaries without having to worry about the chaos of tactical. Because the Custodes player, if they try to stop you from scoring your secondaries, they're going to be so spread out that you're going to easily overwhelm them. They just do not have the unit and the board presence. They have great objective control, but only where they are, if that makes sense. So make sure you take advantage of the fact that they cannot deny your secondaries. Step number 3, do not engage Custodes unless you have to. I was speaking to some of my buddies in my Discord yesterday, and they were an orc player, and they're really, really struggling with how to deal with Custodes. Well, I found out what they were doing is they were shooting their flash kits at them and then charging them into a unit. It's an awful idea. Instead, what you would do is you would take, say, that unit of flash kits, you would shoot all the Custodes, and then you would not charge the Custodes, so that in your opponent's turn, when they move, that's when you overwatch. Because when you overwatch the Custodes with the flash kits, and this applies to any unit in the game, on an overwatch, the Custodes cannot use the stratagem to be -1 damage, which is a very, very big deal, and it really skews the damage into your favor. You do not charge Custodes unless you are 100% certain that you can survive it, or you have like a fight on death stratagem, which will allow you to effectively ignore it. There's a couple other ways, and I definitely taught that in that other video about how to defeat fights first, so make sure you go watch that. And then lastly, you play your mission, not your opponent. Now, this is probably fairly universal advice, but I cannot believe how many people just cannot figure this concept out. If your opponent is pushing really hard, you don't have to push really hard back. You can allow them to do whatever they want because all you need to do is score more victory points than your opponent. So if you have a Custodes player and he has 2 objectives locked down, let him have them. It doesn't matter. Let him have them. And you just go max your secondaries, hold on to your 1 objective. He'll score more primary than you, but you're going to max your secondary and you're still going to score over half of the available primary. It's going to be very challenging for the Custodes player to win that match, which is going to force them to come to you, which gives you the opportunity to set traps for them. So guys, this is how you play against Adeptus Custodes. They are a vicious army, but they are very playable against. Currently, I understand they're doing quite well in the meta. I guarantee you once people learn to start playing a little bit different against Custodes, that win rate is going to drop down to that 52, maybe 53%, because they are a good army, and they are a fairly, I won't say easy, but it's a fairly simple army to play. So you're probably going to see a lot of people in the mid-table range play them quite well. It's a much harder to play them at a higher level, I think. But in the mid-table range, they're a fairly easy army to play. So you will see that win rate drop. You just have to learn how to play against the Custodes. Do not engage, play your mission, not your opponent. Take advantage of them not being able to deny your secondaries, and you kill 1 unit at a time. If you split fire against Custodes, do not complain that you lose against Custodes, because split firing is madness. Do not do it. And with that, my friends, my Grots and Gits, I'm going to sign off for today. This is a video teaching you how to play against Custodes. If you have more questions, or then what you really need to do is check out that video on Fights First. But if you have other questions, definitely type them down in the chat below. I answer pretty much every question that happens in chat. Also, definitely hop into the Discord. The members only section is where I go over most of my in-depth strategy. The free section is kind of a lot of memes. We talk a little bit of strategy in the free section, but the vast majority of the meats and potatoes is in the paid member section. I know, horrible of me for wanting to make a living, but I love and I appreciate all of you guys for your attention. I really, really hope you have an amazing day. Until next time, nerds, happy crumping. Bye-bye.